What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, and as always, remember, you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. Do note I was also the Innovation Award winner given out last year by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. But it's not about me. And we welcome back a gentleman I have not seen for a minute. We keep in touch once in a while through Twitter direct message. I know he had a health challenge and he just has so many things going on. And I had to nail him down Friday night Eastern time, early Friday evening Western time to finally get him on the Dr. Vibe Show, home of Epic Conversations. Welcome back, Dr. Stephen Lake. How are you, Dr. Lake?
Well, I'm feeling good right now. Thank you. I had my tennis this morning and saw some clients, and now I'm ready to talk with you.
Well, it's about time. It's been a long time that every time I reach out, I got this going on, or we would miss each other because of timing or something. And it's not bad. And Stephen always keeps positive productive because, as you know, I never use the word busy. He always, I don't use that word. You always keep positive productive. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your conversations with your clients.
Yes.
And I guess we met originally through a great website called the Good Men Project.
That's right. Yeah.
And just a little bit about Stephen. He's a speaker, coach, master of crisis. That's interesting. We need to do a conversation about being a master of crisis. He's a master communicator and known by many as the relationship guide. He's the author of a great book called Talk to Me, How to Communicate with Women. His expert communication skills keep him connected to family, friends, colleagues, and most importantly, his intimate partner. He has a doctorate in educational administration, a master's degree in counseling. He is an adjunct professor at Alder University of Professional Psychology and has worked as a psychotherapist for 20 years in the lovely city of Vancouver, British Columbia. But tonight, he's not talking about communicating with women.
Yeah.
He's not talking about psychotherapy. He wants to talk about white privilege.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting because we've been going back and forth for a number of weeks and months about this conversation topic. And I'd like to ask Stephen, why do you want to talk about this one?
Well, because it means something to me. It's real personal. I'll get into that maybe a bit later as to why it's so personal. But on the obvious level, it's like you and people of color, they are a part of my world in a day-to-day experience. And if I feel that they are not being treated justly in the same way that I am with my privilege, and I know they're not in many ways, that hurts me. And it hurts me at a real visceral level. So so it's important for me to talk about this. And the whole thing of white privilege too, it's as I started to think about it, because I am not an expert on white privilege. I'm not an academic in that specific area at all. And I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of very white privilege-y of me, that I think I can talk about white privilege, even though I know shit about it. It's like there's the first instance of white privilege. And I'm the perfect example of white privilege in many ways. I'm white and I'm older. So
and you're male.
And I'm male. Exactly. So I have all three elements that gives me a lot of privilege. And what I've noticed is that I've never really thought about it. And that's white privilege in itself.
Exactly. Now, and I appreciate your transparency. When was there an incident that made you start thinking about it?
I think what's been going on in the States, when Black Lives Matter, that's when it became really apparent to me. Like I knew the general history of America and slavery and all that stuff, but it was like very general. It was in the back. It wasn't in my day-to-day lived experience. And recently, about maybe 4 months ago, I started reading Jill Lepore's book, These Truths. which is it's about American history, but from including the Black perspective. And it just blew my mind away. I mean, every page I'm reading going, oh, the stories are very personal. So it wasn't just sort of a bunch of statistics, which you can get some distance, These were personal stories. And I was just shocked. And I became really aware of how the economy in the States and politics and racism have been all wrapped up for so long. And the book actually explained to me how Trump could come to power.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's sort of like, it agitated me.
Devil's advocate would say, especially a person of color, saying you're just coming to realize white privilege now, like all those years that you've been on this earth, it just becomes an issue now. They sort of question saying, like, where were you before a few months ago?
Yeah, I think where I was encapsulated in my white privilege bubble, and I teach at a university which is very diverse. I'm in a city that's very diverse, so I have the minority of my students often are white. So I have people from Asia, from South America, from Europe, everywhere. So, and we teach cultural diversity. It's an integral part of our programming. So I'm aware at an intellectual level, and I have friends of color, but it doesn't sort of, like, I don't see, like, say in Toronto or in the States where Black people are being killed. I mean, it kind of wakes you up. And so for me, it's distant. That's 3,000 miles away. It's like, oh shit, that's terrible. That's an awful thing. But how does that affect me in my day-to-day existence, other than as a sort of a background niggling, if you will?
Okay. So reading about this book and Black Lives Matter, what did it teach you that you didn't know?
Just how connected Black people are to the American experience, that they are an integral part. So it's not a white history, it's a Black and white history. The two are so interconnected. Like, that's what really blew me away. It's like you can't have one without the other when discussing American history.
Okay.
Yeah.
You say you've been in an environment for many years where it's very diverse minorities. I've been to Vancouver myself. Mm-hmm. It's very diverse. Mm-hmm. Did anyone ever approach you in the education environment about this? Did anyone present this to you at all? Because I find it interesting, and I'm not being hard on you, but it's just very interesting to see, like, just in the last few months, this has become something prevalent in your life, but you've been in a very much, how can I say, diverse environment, and no one ever come to you about that, or say, you know what? Do you realize what's going on? Nothing ever happened, and no one ever approached you. What made you read that? Like, what made you read that book, for instance?
I have an interest in history, and I belong to a book club. And one of my friends, who sort of co-founded the particular book club that I'm with, he was reading it. He's Jewish, and I think there's some connection of the experience of discrimination. So he was reading and said, "This is an amazing book." And I said, "Okay, I read it." I didn't realize what I was getting into when I read it. It's like I said, it's like, oh, like I knew this history is like this general vague thing. But when you hear the specifics and you hear it from the beginning, throughout the ages, through the 300 years of history, it's like getting hit over the head, and in a good way. And this sort of brings up my own personal experience. So my father had been introduced to Jackie Robinson. As a matter of fact, I think he was on the security detail. He was sort of hanging out with some police officers in Montreal when Jackie was playing baseball in Montreal. And that goes, I don't know when that was. It must have been the 50s, I guess. And So my father, uh, when he talked about black people, there was a sense of they were, gee whiz, they were human beings and just like us. Now, that's a loaded statement. I don't want to go into that at the moment, but it was that sense of, oh, they're people. So that's what I was brought up with. And then I even had an uncle who was black. Now, he wasn't a blood uncle, but he was known as Uncle, Uncle Robin. And that was just normal to me. So I didn't, and as a child, as I was like 5 years old, I knew his facial tone was different, was darker, but I didn't know him as being different than that. I was just a child. I had no awareness of that difference at all. And then my father was in the military, so we traveled and lived all over the world. So I got to get a broader experience of people from different cultures, and I liked that. So that's was sort of my upbringing in that acceptance. My first big shock was when I went to Florida, and my aunt and uncle were medical doctors down there. They're white, and the way they talked about blacks shocked me. It was just like I couldn't believe it. These are educated people, and it was like, wow, this is like racism. It was just the way they talked about it. So that was a shock for sure. And in Montreal, so I lived my college years in Montreal. I had a black friend. It was a good friend. Actually, I had a couple. And so people of color were in my life in a positive way. So that became the norm for me. And I wasn't aware of the struggles they had. They never really talked about it. They didn't talk about discrimination. I sort of knew it academically, but they never brought that up. So I was unaware of that. And so studying a bit about white privilege has made me much more aware of the advantages, not so much the disadvantages that I've heard about, the disadvantages that people of color have, but it's the advantages that I have that has I've become more aware of through just the idea of our talk.
So what are some of the advantages that you realize you have or have had?
My view of the world is the norm. In other words, I feel very safe. I never have to worry that someone's going to diss me because of my color, whether subtly or overtly. Nobody's ever yelled at me some, epitaph, some nasty words because of my color. It's never happened. I have had something sort of parallel when I was in Quebec during the FLQ crisis, when I was physically attacked because I was English speaking. I was in a very separatist town at the time. So I knew what it was like to be in the minority. I wasn't a visible minority, but the minute I opened my mouth, I was in trouble.
Right.
So, and that's no fun for sure. I mean, that was scary. That was like, my brother actually was captured and by a bunch of young people, and he was tortured. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, it was crazy in that time. Mailboxes were blowing up, people were dying. Yeah, so that's sort of the closest thing, but that was just such a small instant in time. So what else have I had? I get great service wherever I go. When I go to McDonald's or I go into a high fancy restaurant, I get great service all the time. And if I don't, I say something and it gets corrected immediately. I don't have what happened to me, what we saw on TV about 6 months ago, where the people were basically, the police were called because a couple of black guys were at a restaurant in the States. I mean, that's, I don't have to even think about that. Here's a good one. When a cop pulls me over, my first concern is, oh shit, was I speeding? And then I turn to the cop and say, "Hi, officer." And I know that's the biggest worry I have when I get stopped by a cop.
Right.
In other words,
Right.
the cops are working for me.
Hmm. It's interesting. Some people of color, well, in Toronto here, the policemen have on the side of their cars to serve and protect, and a number of African Canadians will say, who are they serving and protecting?
Yeah, they're protecting rich white males who have power. Now, I'm not rich, so I don't quite fit. I don't fit into that category, but I still get tons of benefit just by being white. And I think there's a lot of subtle stuff too. It's that's why I say it's not so. I think white people don't understand the advantages that they have, and that's when you get the complaints when people sort of challenge them. This whole issue of white fragility comes up, and I think it's because they're just sort of, I don't want to say clueless, but they just kind of deer in the headlight.
Some people would say, Stephen, it's not. It's that they know they have the privilege, they just don't want to admit it.
Well, there is that too, for sure. And then, I mean, there's that unconscious racism. I mean, there's some people who are overtly racist, absolutely. But I'm in a cosmopolitan area where that is really is not only frowned upon, you just don't see it a lot. So it's more the subtle stuff, the unconscious stuff that people do. Like even, for example, seeing three black guys walking down the street. My immediate thought is, "Oh, don't they look cool?" My thought is, am I in danger? Right? And that sucks. Especially if it's at night and it's dark.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just before we go further, just want to shout out, didn't do it at the beginning of the conversation on the Get Vocal platform. I'd like to thank Cliff for stopping by, who's watching the conversation. Patrick was on earlier on. He's jumped off. But on Periscope, we have J Money, Queen Bee, Flo M. Bernard, Sean Osby, and HBG1_join. So if you're on Periscope, if you have any questions, type them up, or any comments. If you're on Get Vocal, you can type them up in the chat and also join the conversation via webcam. And also we have 1 or 2 people watching on YouTube. Again, thanks everyone for jumping in. If you have any comments on questions via the YouTube platform, type them in. We're happy to have a conversation about this very important topic. Stephen, when you're getting more and more into this, when you share about white privilege to whites, what are they saying?
Well, I don't know because I haven't talked to them about it.
Oh, okay. and why not?
Maybe because in this particular city, the issue isn't as current. It isn't as strong. We actually have a small black population here, but we do have a lot of people, visible minorities. So Chinese, East Indian, those would be the two most predominant groups here. And there's a very small black population as well. And we have a South Asian community, quite a quickly growing South Asian community. We also have an Iranian community as well, quite large, Persian. So, there's a conversation that I think it'd be great to bring up I belong to a men's group, and it's a rather young men's group. They're between, say, 35 and 45. I'm sort of a bit of an outlier there. And that'd be a great conversation to bring up. And we have of color there and different ethnicities and stuff like that. So it'd be really interesting to hear, what their experience is. I used to teach ESL as well, English as a second language. So I had people from all over the world, and getting their points of view and what it's like to either be a visible minority or even if you are white, what's it like not to know the local language? So the challenges of that. But going back to your question, how come I haven't had that conversation? And I think it's because, I'm so caught up in the work I'm doing and busy, and it's just not an issue locally, and that's why I think that this conversation is so important to me. It is making me aware, well, it may not be so important locally at one level, but nationally and internationally, if we include the states, this is a huge issue. It's massive. And it's also, I think, much more relevant, say, like in Toronto or back east in the Maritime provinces.
True.
Yeah,
because a much higher population of African Canadians in Toronto, eastern part of Canada than there is in the West.
Yeah.
Where
it shows up mostly here? It's in our relationship with First Nations people, with Indigenous populations. That's where you see a lot of overt racism. Overt. Because and here in Vancouver, we see First Nations people every day. They're on the street. And even though they tend to be congregated in some of the poorest areas of town, they're everywhere. They're street people. A lot of them are First Nations people. So they're in our face. You know what I mean? So we can't ignore that. We can't not see that. I mean, you could turn away, I suppose, but I mean, it's there.
It's ironic we're talking about this week in light of what's been going on, especially the last few days in the United States. There was a big hearing in front of the House of Representatives in the United States talking about reparations. So basically, from what you've read, what you're thinking, what are your thoughts on reparations for African Americans and African Canadians?
I was thinking about that. And the first thing that came into my mind was not whether it should happen or not. It was like, there's no way they're going to pay for that, because the cost would be astronomical. The damage, when I was reading that book, that history book, of how towns were wiped out, businesses were wiped out, Black people's businesses in town, their livelihood, how they weren't allowed to get loans for housing, and that housing is a key economic factor. If you can't get a house, you can't build, and you can't build wealth for future generations. I mean, the numbers would be staggering if we could really do that. I think ethically and morally, we absolutely, this should, I mean, we're talking racism, we're talking death, we're talking lynchings, which can continue. I mean, one of the things that upset me the most is like World War II soldiers coming back with their uniforms on, were lynched. It's like, what is that? That's, to me, that kind, and how do you pay for that? Really? I don't think there's enough. You couldn't pay enough money, but we could do things like making services, making education more available, sort of being, and I know there's been efforts, especially in the States, about making certain services and certain programs that have helped disadvantaged groups. But I mean, we absolutely need to apologize. If we can apologize to First Nations people from that genocide, I think we can definitely apologize to our Black brothers and sisters who suffered just as horrendously.
All the interesting thing, I've had a few people say to me, well, reparations should happen because other groups historically have received reparations. Why not Blacks?
Right. And like the Japanese, for example, come to mind. Yes. I was just reading about that today. Actually, I was listening to something on CBC about that. And so, yeah, why not Blacks? And like I said, the only thing that comes to mind is, how would they afford it? Which it may sound like a weird thing to think about, but it's because I can just see people going crazy with that. One of the House leader for the what would that be in the States, in the Senate or the House of Representatives? He was like, no way did he want to go there.
Oh, you mean Mitch McConnell?
Yeah. It's like, No way.
Yeah, in the Senate.
Yeah.
He had quite, and I'm paraphrasing something he said, that one of the things he said, well, you know what? No need to go there. And a great example, he said that, look, the first African American president was elected. One thing that Mr. McConnell did not say is, as soon as Barack Obama was elected, he made it known to his caucus they were going to do everything they can to stop anything he wanted to do.
Yeah.
So just conveniently positioning. Yeah, he got elected, but you didn't let him do anything.
Yeah. And what I also didn't like was he said, well, we didn't do anything. That's for, that's going back hundreds of years. We're not responsible for those horrible things. And it's like, that's bullshit as far as I'm concerned. It's like, hold on, stuff goes on today. Right? Stuff goes on today. And we need to take responsibility for that. And by we, I mean everybody in the nation, but white people need to be accountable and take responsibility and say things have to change. Black lives do matter. And even if I'm quote unquote, I'm a liberal, left-leaning white person, that's not an excuse. That's not a go home or get out of jail free card. It's like we need to be actively out there, in the same way that women have said they need men to be participating in their emancipation and their trying to become equal.
I know that a lot of this is probably focused on the United States, but do you think that white privilege is also a Canadian issue?
Yes, I think so. And because we don't it's not as, we haven't had so many obvious horrible things happen, but we've got white supremacist groups here. We've got hate crimes going on here. And I think that's something we have to be careful as Canadians. We like to say, well, we're better than that. But are we really? I've lived in Alberta. I've lived in some of the redneck places of Canada. And, I have someone in Saskatchewan, he's upset because right now there's a lot of people from Sudan and Ethiopia, and they happen to be going to Saskatchewan for some crazy reason. I mean, it's one of the coldest spots in Canada. They're coming from Ethiopia. They're going, and he's complaining. He says,
what is he complaining?
Oh, he goes to the bank, and there's all these lineup of these people of color and the services. They're using our services, so now there's longer waits at the hospital, and I'm just thinking, shaking my head, going, "Are you kidding me?" It's like it boggles my mind, right? So I have to challenge him and say, well, and I sort of question it and I push him because he probably wouldn't say that he's a racist. He would not self-identify that way. He sees it more as the loss of privilege. Interesting. Come back to privilege. He sees the loss of his privileges, but he doesn't see that his privileges are what you call sort of only to his particular group, his in-group.
Yeah, it's like it sounds like his attitude is that like I should be first in line no matter what.
Exactly. Because it's always been that way.
Yes, I mean, and also reinforced because of my whiteness.
Yeah, but he would probably argue that, right?
Of course
he would. But he wouldn't say that because he doesn't want to. He wouldn't want to take that on. But I agree with you.
And it's interesting. I've done a few conversations over the last few weeks, and especially it's an issue already in the States, but it's also becoming a growing issue in Canada. White privilege, aka immigration.
Okay. Yeah.
And
I think that's where that's when you start to see their racism come up, is immigration, because it's about change. It's about not understanding the other, right? It's tribalism. It's the fear of losing the advantages that we have.
Right.
And then those nasty things can come out.
And obviously the world has not become a kinder place, it's becoming a meaner place, as we see not only in the neighbor south of us, but in a lot of European places,
Mm-hmm.
If you look like me, you're not always welcome.
Exactly. It's like you're, you know, and this is where I think education is so important, because most that difference, you know, and one could even argue that, you know, that there's a biological thing, right? That we, you know, it's tribalism theory, you know, we sort of gravitate to those that are like us, and those that are not like us, we are suspicious of until we get to know them. I mean, even like in Israel and Palestine, when they get people outside of their normal day-to-day existence and they get them, say, at a camp and they start talking, or you get mothers who both had their children die and they start talking, people start to see their similarities, and we're more similar than different. And then people lose that fear, and then it's like, and people have become friends. You know, people have been sort of lifelong, I would never be a friend with that kind of person. You start to have friendships. And then that is so important. And then education, I think, is critical. So let's go to, you know, my education in history. I didn't even know there were Black people in Canada.
There have been since like the 1500s and 1600s.
Exactly. It was never mentioned once, you know, and I'm a bit of a history buff and I like it, you know, so I discover local history, like, oh, there was a group that came up, there's a little island off here that settled in what's called Salt Spring Island, and I've met some of the descendants of those people. They came here, a long time ago, over 100 plus years ago. And then there's a group that came out from the States and went to northern Alberta. There was a whole community, a whole town. And then, but I never heard about that even when I lived in Alberta. I didn't know about that. I hear about it through CBC radio, which is great. It's like, that educates me. It's like, wow, I didn't know that. And so I think that's why I was saying before, the importance of education, to open our eyes, to give us an understanding of what's out there and the way we can interact with people who are, you know, not like us, so that we can create inclusivity, so we can create friendships, so that we can create a deeper understanding. And in particular, this idea, what's your experience like? What's it like to be Black? Seriously, like, what is that like? Because I don't really know.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Just catching up here on the YouTube side, Paul Johnson saying, but our taxes pay for other people's reparations. And he says, we can work out a payment plan. And he then says, F an apology, cut the check.
Yeah.
Virgin Bro says, my stepfather was racist to the point that he refused to allow me to bring my best friends to our home because they were Black. I never understood racism. And Virgo Bro is asking, did you ever read the book Black Like Me?
Yes, I did.
Classic book.
Classic. And I read that as probably 18, 19. And that was a seminal book for me. Yeah.
But again, people will say, you read that book at 17, 18 years old. It didn't have an impact for you to push further.
Yeah. Well, I had no Black people in my life. So what was there to push with? Until I did. So when in college, I had 2 Black friends. Then they were very close. One of them actually lived in my apartment with me. So there's my brother, him, and myself. And then I had another Black friend. It was almost like part of me gravitated to people who were different. Maybe because I had that uncle who was Black, maybe my experience in other cultures. It's almost like I was intrigued and I wanted to, you know, connect with them. And I can't say that was an intellectual thing. It was just an internal drive that I had. And that was great. But we never sort of talked about that. I never really asked, you know, do you have any struggles or challenges that I don't have?
Mm.
You know, I never really got to ask that. It was almost like you didn't go there, at least at that time. So that would be in the
Right.
late 70s. You didn't ask that. Though we saw stuff going on in the States, especially, you know, with the Vietnam War and all that stuff, and black musicians, of course, uh, and the influence they had. So there was a sense that, you know, as a white guy, you know, like there was something very cool about what's going on there. There was something that was more alive than, pasty white bread stuff.
You said it, not
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. So it's like even tonight, I thought I gotta have some color on. Put some...
There we go. There you go. Uh, why do you feel in today's society it's still such a hard thing for many white males to admit that they have white privilege?
Because I don't think they've thought about it enough. They haven't really thought about it, and they haven't had enough conversations. It's like to talk with people of color, to talk with black people, say, okay, I don't think I have white privilege. I don't understand it. What do you mean by that? And then to hear and to really listen, and that's so important. So again, it's that engagement. We need to engage, right? We can't. And then when you do,
But okay, so let me
yeah,
ask you, who has to take the lead on that? Because right now we're very polarized. A lot of peoples are polarized. Who would you suggest? Okay, so I'm just checking here.
I'll answer that question. I think we should.
Sure.
I think we should, because we're coming from the place of privilege. So we should make it easier, right? We should be putting out the hand. It's like, hey, I don't understand. Could you tell me what's going on for you? How I don't get that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking here on Periscope. You for sight saying it's hard for them. I guess he's saying white people, because you also have to think about where that right of privilege came from, slavery.
Right. So I think there's an inherent built-in guilt there, because most people I
And then,
know don't agree with slavery, and it always comes. That's where it goes back to, and it's like, that's a horrible thing. And I think everybody agree with it. It's like, how do I deal with it? It's my, and then everything, and yeah, and that's just the beginnings of it.
right.
That's just the beginning. That's why that book is I'm finding so powerful for me. It's called These
Okay.
Truths, which is interesting. These Truths.
Okay, just want to catch up again. You Foresight saying, so to avoid the conversation altogether, you just don't say anything. The roots of white privilege is slavery, and you can't open one door without opening up the other. Also want to thank Shulik CISSP has joined on Periscope, and also JB Allen 5. Thanks for joining on the Periscope side. Again, if you have any questions, comments, please share them out. We're getting some nice conversation night comments in the chat room. Very relevant stuff. Let me just see if we got anything going on the YouTube end at the moment, because I know there are people there. No, okay,
Yeah.
we're good.
See, I think, Dr. Vibe, I think what would happen is if people really talked and opened up their hearts, and it might be hard for guys, we would cry. Like, as I talk about this, even with you, part of me, it's emotional, because it's like, and that's what empathy is, right? So if I really hear you and really get your experience, it's going to upset me, and so it should. And we, as in a privileged position, I don't want to be upset. I don't want to have to say, geez, I might be contributing to this unwittingly. Ignorance is bliss.
I receive what you're saying. I just think there is a growing number of people that empathy isn't even in their realm. All they're caring about is their own world.
Yes.
So you'll get people saying, "Hey, I feel you understand, but I'm just trying to make it every day. I got enough on my back. Don't want to hear anymore." Or some people say, "You know what? Don't even want to hear about it. That's your problem, not my problem. We just push on."
Right. Yeah, and that's ignoring the issue. And I think the counter argument, or part of the counter argument to that, would be, well, I'll give you an analogy. It's like my wife. She says, if I have a problem, you have a problem.
Yeah, but you and your wife are there, but how many people are there?
Well,
that's what my concern is.
That let's take a survey. But I think generally speaking, I agree with you. People don't want to talk about something that is so painful, like even the First Nations issue. I mean, people, they don't want to talk about it. It's painful.
It's an eyesore.
Yeah,
it's a real eyesore.
Yeah. And when I hear, like they don't have drinkable water in some of the reservations, and I've been on these reservations, all right, and it's like it's a disaster zone. It's like a third world country in some of these places, and it's like, and we've got them hidden off. It's almost like an apartheid, right? We have those little places, we even give them a little name and hidden off, and then we don't. Well, okay, done my duty. They get their welfare checks. That's it. How come they're so they have to deal with so much sexual abuse and alcoholism and stuff like that? That's their problem, not really. Well, gee, we actually contributed to that in a major freaking way. And so these are difficult conversations. So I guess to answer your question, what we need to do is have more of these conversations and look for opportunities to have them. And even we don't even have to go for agreement, but just to make people engage with us. And so, what I can commit to is what I said earlier. I can bring this up to my group, which is a diverse group, people of color in there. So I can bring that up and to start that conversation, and hopefully they will go out and have more conversations to make people more aware. Because otherwise, it's going to get polarized, as you're suggesting. And then when people are polarized, and this is a whole thing that's going on in the States, tribalism gets in there and things can get really nasty, as in violent. And we've seen that.
So you Foresight for you too on YouTube is saying, oftentimes in an interracial friendship, you concentrate on the positive and let other people come up and tell you how rare or bizarre of a friendship it is, or bizarre the relationship is. It's like people, I just don't know what's going to shine the light on some people's minds. There's some people that are just not going to open up at all, but there's still a lot of people that could, in my opinion, get it and say, you know what, this working on this against white privilege makes all of society better.
Absolutely. So you have to talk about the benefits. So if I come from a place of privilege, why would I give up some of my privilege? And I think
that's a good question.
That's right. So, and I think there are lots of benefits. We would become a richer society. And I don't mean that just monetarily, but I think monetarily as well. Because when I've seen, people of color in the States and how they've done business-wise and how they actually form their own banks, for example. And it's like there's a lot of creativity. So we're not taking advantage of the wealth that's inherent in every person. Every person can really contribute to society. And if we're saying, okay, X million of people, we're going to disadvantage you, whether consciously or unconsciously, that's just stupid to me as a society. We're not taking advantage to encourage people to flourish, to contribute in the arts and finances, in whatever. You know, and a good example of a breakout person would be, say, like Oprah. There's somebody who passed the color line and opened people up in many different ways. Now, most of her audience, and especially in the beginning, were women, which is interesting. But do you know by the end, 30% were men?
Yes, I. Some people will say that the reason why Oprah became as big as she is white women.
So, can you explain that more to me?
Well, I think in the early days, especially,
Mm-hmm.
Oprah's, and here's a term again that's come up in white privilege, her base was white women.
Ah, okay. So, because of that, she was able to move up.
Yeah, but even then, and there was this, I remember this story a few years ago. She was, I think, in some country in Europe, I don't know, Scandinavia, etc. And she was in a shop wanting to buy a purse, and she got flack and got some name calling of herself. The person didn't know who she
Right,
was, but
right,
you know, the white privilege thing is still prevalent even with someone in a position like Oprah.
right. And this goes to the white privilege. There's some argument that it's actually a, a planetary phenomenon because of colonialism. And I've heard people in Southeast Asian countries put themselves down that white is better. And that just shocked me when I was like, oh my God, I really saw the effect of colonialism. And these are cultures that are, you know, been going for thousands of years.
Well, I am very happy that we're joined by Cliff because I know this is one of the things that up Cliff's wheelhouse. So Cliff, thanks for being in the
Yeah,
conversation.
no problem.
What you say?
I'm
What you say?
boy, I've been just like bubbling up a lot of stuff along the way. Thank you for the conversation, Stephen and Dr. Vibe. Um, this is really it's a complex emotional mess that goes back to pre-colonial, right? The colonization stuff we were just talking about triggered me on another point of subserviency. You know that's how it was. The Europeans and whatnot conquered the African countries and took over the English, especially colonial England, took over so much area, and then that just said, "Hey, look, we're better than you. We got more money than you. We're going to come in and do whatever, and we're going to use you as slaves in place, much less bring you over to America and do all of that." So there's so much going on here to get into white privilege and the idea today of what we're dealing with. And here I am, a white male in the U.S. Um, and I considered going into politics in the last couple of years because of what's going on in politics. And I said, boy, I'm at a disadvantage because I'm a older white guy, at this point. And I don't have any problem with that. At times I wish I wasn't. So my privilege is reversed almost right now in the States there's just so much anti in what I'm trying to say, in the politics area. There's so much movement towards we're done with old white men. Any gray hair on a white guy, we're done with them. We want to move on. That's where Joe Biden's kind of really struggling in a number of ways amongst his own problems that he created over the years. Is that he's an older white guy and he's just out of touch too, and all that other stuff. But beyond that, the real core of what I'm getting from this conversation, there's so many prongs to it. It's like I just see this forest of forks sticking into the ground that we're just trying to navigate as humans. And this, and some of the great questions you had, Dr. Vibe, and fantastic answers as well, kept stirring up for me that the simplicity of humans just coming together, regardless of race, creed, color, where they came from, what their background is, all of that stuff, regardless, that we're all here on this rock together. I mean, and I'm not trying to be utopian about this and ignorant to the fact that we have history. Okay. I'm talking about the human race. Forget about countries and colors and stuff. We have history that separates people. which is not a good history. It's what's happened, and it has caused wars and stealing and raping and pillaging and killing and, well, all of this insane stuff. Insane to me and most people who care about each other and say, why the hell are we fighting? What are we fighting over? What color? Because your religion is different, because and what we're seeing more today, you guys brought up earlier in the conversation about this whole divide and conquer, keep people divisive, keep people at each other's throats, regardless of why. See, the powers that be want to stay in power. And the only way that they can continue to do that, especially in these times of chaos, is to keep people fighting amongst themselves. And that's their goal, is to, and you see it with, obviously the leader of this country at this point, if you want to call him that, Donald J. Trump, that one of his tricks and shticks is to keep people, it's always a winner and loser. It's a game. Somebody has to lose. There is no win-win in his book. And of course, it's always about him winning, but beyond his narcissism, all that nonsense. What one of his indirect tricks that's going on is that we're at each other's throats. And it's whether it's right, left, Democrats, Republican, whatever the thing of the day is that's going on. It's always about keeping people apart and highlighting their differences instead of celebrating their sameness. And that's the core that keeps coming back to me. The whole conversation here is like, what the F are we doing, people? What are we doing? And why? Because of history? Because of what happened? We have to continue it. And one of my concerns we haven't talked about tonight that came up in other conversations. I think, Dr. Bob, you and I talked about this offline a little bit, is the upset and anger from groups towards other groups because of the past. Yes. And I'm not talking go Mitch McConnell on this, because that was ridiculous, but it's what I would expect out of him, which is sad.
Yeah.
That he would say, well, it's not our fault, it's my grandfather's fault. He owned the slaves. I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with this. We're all done with that. Let's wash our hands and move on. Aside from the patheticness of all of that, what we have today is what we have. Our feelings, a lot of them are based on story and history. And it's not that we should throw that away as we look to today and beyond, right? Stephen, I hope you agree here with some of this idea. As we look forward and say, how do we create conversation? Conversation, it's great that you take your group who are a mixed ethnicity group and so forth, and bring this up. And let's talk about these privileges that we have that we never talk about, because it's uncomfortable, because it brings up the differences. And why are we here? Why do we have this white privilege? Why is it so separatist? And a lot of it is just where we've been. One of the things that's come to me, especially over the last couple of months, in a number of ways. And one way is listening to some of what Kyle Cease is doing. He's a comedian turned transformational guy. Very funny, he's been doing comedy on stage since he was 12. He was on Comedy Central with great, fanfare. But anyway, I didn't know anything about him 2 months ago. And then I actually spent 4 days with him and 100 other people or so in New York at the Omega Institute back in May. And it was phenomenal to listen to some of the very core basic ideas of working from your heart, connecting with another person at that level. And it's not about then the history. And it was amazing to watch him work the room, because people would, and I don't mean in a way of a comedian, but in terms of working with himself and his heart, opening himself and other people. And it's just amazing stuff went on in a few days. But in that time, we saw people with a lot of different stories, a lot of racism, a lot of, preconceived ideas of what something or somebody should do or shouldn't do or should have done, and why they're angry and sad or depressed or upset. And it all came down to, we're holding on to the history. And and this is where I was going back to what you and I had talked about very briefly, Dr. Vibe, and other shows that I've been on, where people were just damn freaking angry. And in this case, I'm talking about, African-American, Black, just angry at what has happened, and they just do not want to let down that anger. They just want to hold on to it, like it's going to create some more conversation. in the white privilege guys or something, or the power people, or we're going to get some reparations, or we're going to get some relief if we stay in this fight. And so what I got in the last number of months is that the more we push and the more we fight something, the more we continue to create that energy of just banging into it. Whereas if we let go of it and let go of the past and say, then not to throw away the history again, I don't want to do any of that. But if we take and we say, okay, we can't go back and change that. What we can do is change the way that we feel, right? And our thinking will follow. So again, this is our hearts leading our minds. And this is the core of the future of humanity, one way or the other. Either we're going to get this right or we're going to go down in flames. This is my belief at this point. And I've been doing a lot of meditating and a lot of talking about this with other people. And it really comes from, if we can't lead from our hearts, we're screwed. And so we need to go inward, find our center, find our, feel what we're feeling, let some of that, if not all of it, kind of go. And that will allow our hearts to open up to others, to meet them where they are, regardless of if they are angry or sad or upset or wanting to push for something. A good example was Kyle had somebody in the big theater where they hold the Oscars last 2 years ago. And I just happened to bump into this. It was a watch party or something. And I just bumped. So the lady was all about anti-vaxxing or autism being on the rise that we know about. We've seen it over the last 20, 30 years. Incredible numbers. And she's all mad and upset and wants to take down these, the pharmaceuticals that are injected, all of this. And his point to her was, you're meeting these people who you are feeling, angry at and upset with. And their goal is to make money, in her mind and other people's, and that it's not about saving the kids or making them healthier. It's about selling more vaccines or whatever the hell is the problem, right? And if you're going in and you're fighting with them and you're meeting them, it's sort of like Trump fighting Trump. What are you going to get from that? You're going to get nothing. It's a lose-lose, right? And so what he said is, if you meet them from another position of love and open-heartedness, and not only the kids that are suffering and the parents, but the actual people that are doing this, and start killing them with kindness, if you will, and loving the idea that, okay, we get why you're doing this. I get it. So let's change the conversation to something like, can we take and move to a safer type of vaccine, get rid of the thimerosal, whatever it is, the stuff that might be causing the problem, instead of ignoring it and saying it's not our problem and it's all bullshit. So anyway, made a lot of different points here, but it all comes down to the heart. If we can change our minds, and this is that whole anger piece, and even the white privilege thing is a concept. Yeah, it comes out in so many ways in reality, as we see it in every country. As Stephen was saying, it's everywhere. And it's more prevalent where you've got a mix, and more prevalent where you've got more people with greater diversity and guns and police and blue on black and all of that stuff going, especially in the States. It's more obvious and more challenged right now. But anyway, so if we can find our way to our hearts individually and just become more heart-centric and let our hearts run this way instead of the opposite. Because our hearts are all shut off most of the time. They have to be, to protect ourselves. And you guys were talking earlier, and I'll stop rambling in a minute, about burying your head in the sand. And not my problem, not my backyard. You're black, I'm white, not my problem. Something else will happen. It's not for me to solve. So I'm just going to go back to my white life, or whatever it is you consider is safe and protected from that issue. And then let somebody else deal with it. And that's bullshit, right? That's not going to do it. But if we say, look, I am willing to, like Stephen, he was blind to this stuff because he grew up with an uncle who was in the family who was black, and so on and so forth. And it didn't even cross his mind until he goes and sees two doctors who are in his family in Florida who should be saving lives and helping people. And they're talking like racists. And they are, and so that's just, but that's, it isn't his fault that he was not. Why do I not realize about my white privilege, or why do I think that people aren't being discriminated and so forth because of color. It's just it wasn't in his wheelhouse. It wasn't a concept that he was exposed to, and so many of us were like that. Now, my father, just in a quick story, he grew up in West Orange, New Jersey, and he saw his father kill a black man on his front porch when he was a child
Wow.
with his fists. Like just because he was there, there was no fight, there was no reason for this. It was a black guy, and my father ended up being a terrible bigot. He was like Archie frickin' Bunker, okay, and it was part of where they grew up, and it was very very rough, and it was you took your life in your hands, and it was black versus white during that time in West Orange, New Jersey, a lot of slums, all this stuff. And my father saw terrible things, both at the war and prior to that, made him very hard. But it saddened me, but it made me aware of what that kind of language sounded like right in my own home. He would say things, and he wouldn't do it out in the open. He would just do it behind closed doors. And so I was like, what the heck is that about? So I got curious. My whole thing is about curiosity. And I'll end on the curiosity note. Hey, Herbie, welcome to the show here. If you're not curious and you're not operating from down here in your heart zone, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting, the rest of us. You're hurting the whole process that we struggle with every day with all of our differences that should not be driving our minds and our hearts. We should be coming into it open. And again, it's not a panacea. It's a actual intention that you have to work through as an individual and say, I'm going to lead from here. And I'm just going to be open to what comes and meet people where they are and be empathetic. Right? That empathy thing came up early in the conversation. And my son's bouncing around, is key. And the empathy, but has to come back to the heart, right? That's where it comes. It doesn't come from up here. It doesn't come from the story. And I saw this and I didn't see that. And it just says, man, we're all the same. That's it. It's simple. And to hold on to history and other things and fight over something that happened years ago, or try to fight into something that we want to fight for something for, instead of just opening up to it. So I know it's a little bit extreme for some. That may be listening to this out there, and I don't know what's going on the other chats. If we've stirred anything up out there, hopefully, in some of this. So I'll turn it back to you guys. Thank you again for getting me stirred up. And
that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Stephen, what do you think it's going to take? Cliff is talking, getting people to talk. And a lot of people are not in the talk or wanting the talking phase. What do you think it's going to take to get people to just talk and hear what's going on?
Well, I think
when it comes to privilege.
Yeah, I think we need those of us that are curious, as Cliff was saying, those that feel the pain of it, that people are hurting, people are disadvantaged, people are suffering, and actually want something better, to come from our hearts and talk with. Don't go to the extreme to find, okay, I'm going to talk to the racist of the day. No, talk to your friends. You may even have some racist among them that you don't even know about. But talk to the people that you have a relationship with. That's a great place to start. And as Cliff said, come from your heart and just open yourself up, and then encourage them to continue the conversation with that. With 2 people talk to 2 people, and 4 people talk to 4, and you get that logarithmic expansion. We need to do that. Where I live, it's not like I can go across the street and well, where's the local racist? I'd be hard put to find one who's obvious, right? But I definitely have lots of friends out there that I could talk to, and that's why I'd say start easy. Start with people who are close to you.
Yeah, that's really the curious and questioning position on starting a conversation. I think that's the key is how do you start a conversation? A lot of people, especially with this kind of a thing, even if it's people, around the dinner table, there's 4 or 5 people there, hey, I was on Dr. Vibe's show and it's really, blah, blah, blah came up and we were talking about white privilege and reparations, all kinds of stuff. And what do you guys think about, the idea of working, having our heart kind of control our minds for a change, instead of thinking things through and what's logical and what should I do about that and what was I told and what did I know and what do I think, and as opposed to how do you feel?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so many people don't know. They feel something, and then where do you feel it? Do you feel it in your throat, your stomach, your gut? You know, the lower you go, the more grounded the feeling is. If you're in this area here, and you're feeling, oh, I don't want to talk about it, you know, then versus, man, I feel really solid about this in my lower gut, you know, and even in the groin area. If you're down in that area, you're probably pretty grounded on the points. But so many people aren't in touch with that, and to know where they're feeling it, why, and what really is driving that. And it's really about programming, which is our stories and our history and all that we've been taught or learned or watched or seen, or it's not how we're feeling in the moment. And that's what would drive me to conversation with people. I wouldn't know if they're racist or not, or I do think they might be or something. And everybody has some of that in them, of
Mm-hmm.
every color, of every person. There's racism in each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
Question is, what do we do with it? How much does it control us? Does it make us turn away? Does it make us say, well, that person, because of their color or their different, you know, like Oprah's in her buying a thing over in Denmark. They don't know it's Oprah. She's like, oh, you're you know, it's a super white country. And they see somebody that looks different and they feel threatened. And I think, Stephen, your friend there you were talking about, who has the people from very dark skinned people coming in from Africa, right? Into his very light-skinned area, and now he's feeling. I wonder how he. My question to him would have been, "What if they were white? What if they were coming in from Denmark?"
He wouldn't have even noticed. Wouldn't even have
Well,
noticed. You know what I mean?
well,
That's part of the problem, right?
if it really, and that's where the curiosity comes in. I'm really curious about, like, is it because the line is longer, or because it's filled with black people?
I think it's because it's filled with black
Right.
people. I think so.
Right. So there might be both pieces of it, but I think the black people, for him, it sounded like it's more important that the people of color coming in and taking my blank privilege of having a shorter line, or just people that I don't feel comfortable with being in line with.
Exactly.
You see, they're different. They don't speak my language. They aren't the same color. You know, these are people I'm not comfortable hanging. If there were other people who spoke his language, they were from the town that next door that got burned out and had to come over, they would have been like, hey, how you doing? Come over to the house for dinner.
Yeah.
You know, how long you been in line? Oh, oh, would you like to get in front of me? None of that's going on, right? So I totally get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd be interested to talk to those people personally, because I've never been to their country, and I've like, what do you guys do over there? How'd you get here? This is amazing that you're here. You know, what can I'd invite them over for dinner, you know? So anyway, that's me. But curiosity, questioning, you know, interest in others, is where we need to go. So if you reach out and you say, I'm intrigued by what people feel first. How do you feel? Are you lonely? You're feeling displaced? You know, I'd be feeling for those people who've been moved from their country, you know, and not necessarily intentionally. They end up in Canada, in the coldest place in Canada. Like, how do you do that? Do you have fur coats that you found from the Eskimos up north? You know, that's what I'd be curious about. How does this feel?
Yeah.
You know, to be here. This must be, and their blood and you know, they're not built. Their genetics are not built to be in, you know, 15-degree weather. I'm talking Fahrenheit. You know.
Yeah.
Yes,
Anyway.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to, Stephen.
Yeah.
What do you see in the short term, the state of white privilege in North America?
In the short term, I think things are going to get worse before they get better. But I think
Why?
Because they're just where we are sociologically, people are starting to polarize, and it's been happening in the States more so and sooner, but we are sort of catching up. So a number of provincial governments have voted conservatives into power, right? There's 6 of them now, just recently. Who knows what's going to happen in the next federal election? So I think things are going to get more polarized. My hope is with the young people. I think they're amazing, and they have even though their focus is really on climate change, and in Canada, that really incorporates First Nations people, which is a good thing. So there's going to be that psychological inclusivity that's occurring on that political level as people are really getting upset about climate change. I even have a person the other day, there's a new thing coming out, climate change anxiety disorder. People are so worried about climate change, they're getting like anxiety and panic attacks. It's a big issue. So yeah, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, but I think in the midterm, I would say it's looking good, because we're going to have to pull together to make things better.
Yeah.
So
We're moving
out of
from
self-interest, we're going to have to do
or
that.
survival, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
First thing is survival. Thriving is next. Hopefully, flourishing we'll get to. But right now, we just got to stop the planet from burning up. And by sticking your head in the sand, working from your brain or your pocket book or your wallet to say, oh, I just want my Lexus, and I just want my look better than the next guy, and or what are my neighbors going to think if I'm driving a 2006 Volvo, which is what I drive. I don't care. And it's like going back to Kyle Cease and others talking about the universal person versus the social person. The social person cares what other people think and how they show up on media and all that crap. And the universal person is like a tree. You don't really care what the other trees are doing. I'm here to deliver apples or whatever you're doing, whatever your thing is, or oxygen or whatever. They're not concerned, like, unless there's a fire coming at them and say, I wonder, but they're still not concerned if that tree's going to burn. They're concerned, obviously, about what they're there to do and how am I going to fix myself after this fire, and am I going to survive? And that's kind of where we're headed right now.
But I have a question. I have a question for you, Dr. Vibe. Here's us two white guys, chatting away here, and giving our opinions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
White privilege.
Yeah.
But how do you experience it?
I know I experience it in a lot of different ways. I know that a lot of times I go to spaces where I'm the only person who looks like this, and it's a constant battle, because when you're exposed to white privilege and you're the only this in the environment, you're fighting an uphill battle. You know that there's some people that get it, there are the people that don't get it, but you know what? I just speak my truth and speak where I am, and I know that for me, I know in the past I've dealt with it, and it's interesting because I know, periodically I think, hey, if I looked like Stephen or Cliff, where would my life be? Right? And something just rolled in my head that if you look in the United States, the average, I guess, value of a white family in the United States is like 30 times more than the average black family in the United States. So how can someone say white privilege, deny the whole aspect of white privilege, forget not even getting to the reparations? We have to get there first before we even get to the reparations end. And I think the statistics are just there. The history is there. If I took it on, and I'm sure there's some people psychologically, emotionally, it's taken its toll. So I have to just put my best foot out, and I want people to respect who I am. If they're not, I just move away from them. Right? I don't got time. When I had hair, I could deal with it. I lost my hair. I don't got time for it. So I only try to hang only, like I have a thing, OQP, only quality people. And I know white privilege still exists. I'm just happy that slowly but surely more white people are at least admitting that it exists. Forget about trying to, okay, let's overturn this. We just got to get to the admit stage. We just got to forget, as both of you said, we just got to the conversation stage. We've got to do more like this. Like, sure, we have long-term goals, But if we can't even get to the table, if we can't get on a virtual table or a physical table, it's not looking great. And as you said earlier, Stephen, in the short term, especially what's going on politically, it's not looking good. And as we said, one of the things that just may happen is there may be some sort of revolt, and it may not look pretty.
Yep.
Because I think it was a John Kennedy said many years ago, when people don't have a concern, they're going to do anything. When they don't, if they just give up on everything, they're just going to do anything irrationally. So that's my concerns. It exists still. It's interesting. Could we have had this conversation even 5-6 years ago? So there is hope because we're having that conversation with mixed backgrounds, because not, we're talking about Black, but also again, Indigenous people on both sides of the border, same thing. And it's very interesting, especially in Canada, there seems to be a growing alliance between Indigenous people and Black people, which I'm not seeing in the United States, which is an interesting thing. I'm just looking to see if there's any correlation, but I'm seeing it a little bit more, especially in Ontario. There's more conversation between Blacks and Indigenous people because they have a lot of the shared experiences. Not all totally, but they're all being left at the bottom of the barrel, so to speak.
Yeah. And if you want,
they're all being.
If you want some of that shared experience in the States, look to I think it's in Florida, where First Nations people, Indigenous people intermarried with Black people, and there's a whole neat culture there. It's quite fascinating.
That's another conversation, actually, that I had a very interesting conversation with a Black woman the other day who has a very rich family line that is Indigenous also, and that's a whole other conversation in itself.
Yeah.
But again, both those groups have, I'm going to put it out there, suffered because of white privilege.
Absolutely.
I'll just say it from where I've seen it, I've experienced it, I hear it regularly. They suffered because of white privilege, and I just take the attitude, which I think Cliff said earlier, that if we help people who have been shut out get better, everyone benefits.
Exactly.
Everyone benefits, and we've got to get to that point. And again, and Cliff said it earlier, storytelling is the key. Sit down and listen to someone's story. Just take the time, and it just may open up your eyes and make you think about things you never thought about before. And you then can probably lead to some empathy. And then with empathy, then we can get some movement.
Well said.
So
agreed.
That's where I'm at.
And by the way, for those listening without video, Dr. Vibe is a good-looking Black man. That's just in case, because he keeps saying somebody looks like me, and I'm thinking, someone's not watching this. What does he look like? Now they're going to want to tune in somewhere.
Well, just go on the website. There's more than enough replays of video conversation. You'll see action, right?
It's famous.
So, I received the compliment of that. I'm a handsome guy. I work on it every morning.
Yeah, well, he's got a nice shine there. It's beauty. It's beautiful.
Shine. I'd like to thank Cliff. I also like to thank Stephen for taking time out of their positive, productive schedule to share with us. Stephen, if people would like to get in contact with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
The best way would be to go, let's see, I'm on Twitter.
Yes, you are.
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. Most of the social media stuff, I'm on there. You can also email me, dr.steve@sasktel.net. That's SASKTEL.net. dr.steve. Yeah.
Wonderful. I would like to thank all the people who made this conversation epic. Of course, the two gentlemen that are online here, Herbie. There was also Patrick at the beginning of the conversation that was on the Get Vocal platform. On the YouTube platform, if I can quickly bring it up, we had Paul Johnson, U4Sight, 4U2. There were a number of people on the Periscope. For some reason, I can't access all of them, but there was Herbie's Hangout, and there were some other people who I had mentioned already. So if I forgot you, it was because of my head, not my heart. So we're going to leave it at that. I am Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2018 Innovation Award winner, handed out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Upcoming conversations. We're broadcasting this live on June 21st. Coming up on Monday, on the 24th, I'm doing a back-to-back. First gentleman was on Periscope. Name is Jason Allen. I'm paraphrasing the subject. He's talking about, we often regard Black boys as bad before they're even bad. And then we have another lady, Suzanne Venker, I believe her last name is, talking about the future of men and marriage is bleak. So we got quite the double header on Monday. Both of them are going, okay, all right.
That might be true.
Yeah.
Might have something there.
So I think one of those conversation topics, if you have some time, I think will be of interest to you. If you want to find out more about me, the best place to go is my website, thedrvibeshow.com. Like to always say, you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles. You're a solution for someone's problem. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Also, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions, and then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. And hopefully it won't be so long till we have Dr. Steve back on. God bless. Peace to all. Keep the faith. And also a big shout out to Badges who jumped in. Watch the replay. Good night.